Hey guys, welcome back. So now we're jumping back into Venom, and at this point in the series, so many things are coming into the light, and it's nuts. Because at this point, not only do we get the reveal of who Bedlam is, but we also get more context to a number of moments that seemed random before. So let's get into it. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week, and don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squad up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so for this one, we continue to follow Eddie, who we had seen escape from the garden back into the time stream, which had then landed him in the 602nd century on the flagship Nathaniel. And with him arriving here and eventually running into Kang, for Eddie he believed this was the first time they were meeting, but for Kang he told Eddie that they had been friends for eons, and how he had offered Eddie more or less the universe at one point, but then Eddie declined, which then led to Kang telling Eddie that he needs to train him so that he's just not pulled back and forth throughout time. And like we had seen, Eddie agrees because he knows that Dylan's in trouble and he needs to figure this out so he can help his son. But also at that time we had gotten the reveal when Kang had pretended to go use the bathroom, to where then he had just slipped into his back office where we had seen he was talking to Meridius, which had then let us know that Eddie was being baited into someone else's trap. And this wasn't just Kang training Eddie out of the kindness of his heart. But at this point, where we pick up with the continuation of Eddie's training, we find Kang telling Eddie that his main issue or his main limitation is that Eddie still believes himself to be a human being. And Kang makes it clear that this goes beyond the recent death of Eddie Brock. And he tells Eddie that he hasn't been human since the day that he had bonded with the Venom symbiote. And prior to Eddie's death, when he had a physical human body, Kang can understand Eddie confusing himself for human in the beginning, because for the most part his physical body appeared to be unchanged. But when Eddie first bonded with the symbiote on a physical and telepathic level, this symbiosis had made Eddie a different creature, which is even more of the case now with him not having the physical body, and with the way that Kang speaks to Eddie here. Because on one hand we know he's up to something, like we've seen part of the card that is up Kang's sleeve, but even still it's very intriguing the things that he's telling Eddie at this point. In addition to him throwing in rhetorical questions, with him asking Eddie, where's your body now? This body that you had worked so hard to build. And for me, with Kang saying this kind of took me back to Amazing Spider-Man issue 316, where we got one of those moments where we'd see how jacked Eddie Brock was, and we would see how hard Eddie would train just to get in peak physical shape in order for his symbiote to get the most out of him, which would then make Venom as strong as possible. And really it's here where Kang is telling Eddie that he's no longer working within these limitations. Eddie's no longer limited to the functions of the human brain system, and he lets Eddie know that his only limitation at this point is his imagination, which Kang describes to Eddie as the bars of a crib that Eddie has long outgrown. But with Kang asking Eddie if he more or less follows what he's saying, and Eddie's more or less like, yeah, he gets it, symbiotes rock, which really wasn't so much the point that Kang was trying to get to. He's really just telling Eddie that he's not ready yet. But also we notice at this moment that the symbiote that Eddie is using, Eddie's caused it to take on a different form. And when Kang asks Eddie why he's changed into this form, which is a question I'm pretty sure Kang knows the answer to, but again, like we've seen, Eddie's being guided in a specific direction. But with Kang asking Eddie why he changed the symbiote to this form, Eddie lets him know when he became unstuck and entered into the time stream, he saw this vast conspiracy hunting his son, known as the Absent Throne, and he knows that Dylan's in danger. So he left a message trying to tell Dylan about the threat and tell Dylan that he loves him, while also telling Dylan to find Archer Lowell for help, who's an old friend of Eddie's, though Eddie's not sure exactly why he told Dylan to go to her. And it's from here as they continue training, where Kang tells Eddie that he wants to spare Eddie the pain of trying to turn a wheel that only goes one way. And it's for that reason that Kang starts to explain to Eddie the structure of time and how it works. And lesson 1 is you can't change what's been established, and you can only further the routes on top of what's already been mapped. And with saying this, Kang uses Eddie's training for example, because with Eddie coming here and having a level of knowledge about symbiotes as well as his experience, Kang doesn't try to take that away from Eddie, but instead he goes to the more advanced training and he builds on top of what Eddie already knows, which again is like building on top of what's already established. And for the next lesson he tells Eddie that in the case of Dylan, that Eddie at some point had already known that Dylan was going to go to Archer, which means at some point in time Eddie must have given Archer the information she needed so that she could assist Dylan, which again goes back to building on top of what's established instead of changing what's already there. But with Kang telling Eddie that he's gotta navigate like dancing between raindrops rather than trying to wrestle thunder. And that suggestion just doesn't sit well with Eddie, because when it comes to saving his son, Eddie's gonna do whatever it takes, even if it means wrestling the whole sky, which in this case literally means Eddie wrestling against time itself. And with hearing this, Kang tells Eddie that he cannot win that fight, to where from there Eddie leaves because he knows he's just gonna have to take his chances. But just after Eddie leaves, we see Meridius come back again, and with doing so he's checking with Kang to see how it went. And Kang lets Meridius know that he's told him enough truth about time travel and how it can be dangerous, and he's planted the seeds that needed to be planted to send Eddie in the direction that Meridius wanted him to go. But Kang tells Meridius that from here there's nothing else he can do, and with telling Meridius why, he lets him know that it's a matter of raindrops and thunder, which again goes back to the lesson of building on top of something that's already established, and choosing the route of working between events rather than wrestling time itself. And with Meridius hearing this, he tells Kang like, sure, you've done more than enough, the rat has entered its maze, but I want you guys to keep in mind Kang's lesson on the structure of time, because with everything we've seen Meridius do, we've always seen him following this guideline, and his timing now showing up just after Eddie left, that in itself is no different. With them sending Eddie like a rat through a maze, that is an extension of existing events designed for Eddie to find Meridius at the very end. And it's from here where we then see Eddie go back into the time stream, where he arrives in this guy's home 6 days before Eddie's death. And just as a reminder, with us knowing that Eddie can time travel into different symbiotes across time, that for Eddie this has been made infinitely more convenient after the events of King in Black, where there was just leftover symbiote matter everywhere, which for Eddie at this point gave him a number of drop points that he could use with coming back in time and just piloting these symbiotes, much like what we had seen with Meridius when we got the reveal back in issue 5 that he was the second Eddie at home with Dylan, with him using the same method to physically appear within the present day. But in this case with Eddie, he's made his way back in time to 6 days before his own death, really to just use this guy's computer. And with Eddie arriving here, he knows he has to work quick, and not just because this guy's calling the cops and possibly the Ghostbusters, but also because he doesn't fully have the hang of the whole jumping through the time stream gig without having it pull him back. So anytime he does land somewhere in a symbiote, he still feels it tugging at him. But with him coming here, he uses this guy's computer to send an email to Archer Lau to warn her about what's about to happen to him and give her the heads up on how to help Dylan. Which, like we'd seen, this is how Archer learned about the absent throne, to where from there she learned more, which then led her to getting caught sticking her nose in and blackmailed into turning in Dylan. But for Eddie, after sending this email, he then jumps back into the time stream with the intention of making sure that this worked. And when he does this, it's here where we see him arrive in issue 4, in the Alchemax Research and Testing Hub where Dylan was being held. And when Eddie gets here, he's thinking to himself and he's admitting that he couldn't hold a solid form, because for him, seeing Dylan like this, it terrified him. But at this point, the conversation between Eddie and Dylan is the same as what we saw in issue 4. With Eddie asking Dylan if he went to Archer Lau, but this time around we see what Eddie's thinking, with him being surprised that it didn't pan out the way that he had planned it to. And also Dylan telling Eddie about the 2 versions of Eddie at the house, which then has Eddie thinking if he was at 2 places at the same time, or if it was his future self making arrangements that he's not aware of just yet. But again, with Eddie freeing Dylan here just before he leaves, he's pretty upset about how all of this panned out, because he believes that leaving Dylan with the Venom symbiote is what got Dylan here. And with Dylan telling Eddie about what happened with Archer Lau, he regrets sending Dylan to her, because even though Eddie has known Archer for years, she never did like him. And it has Eddie thinking like, wow, how can I make these obvious mistakes? And like we'd seen before, when Eddie leaves, he tells Dylan that Venom will never let him down, because once again, when it comes to the Venom symbiote and Eddie, we are Venom, which means the symbiote is an extension of Eddie. It's his other half, which is why Eddie knows even when he leaves here that the symbiote will come for Dylan. And from here, with Eddie going back into the time stream, he steps into his next plan to help Dylan, with him also saying once again that Kang was wrong, because Eddie needs to fix this, even though he's not exactly sure how he's going to, but for the sake of Dylan, he's gonna do whatever it takes. But with Eddie going back into the time stream, for a brief moment he gets a dose of Kang was right, because first he tries to go back to the house to help Dylan, but Eddie can see Dylan from the time stream talking to what appears to be himself, But this Eddie notices that that version is colder, stiffer, and filled with contempt. And it's not long before Eddie realizes that the version that Dylan is talking to is Meridius. And Eddie's not able to grab another symbiote remains and make his way to the house because Meridius has all the symbiote matter that's in range under his control. So with Eddie needing to warn Dylan and stop him from going with Meridius, he then jumps into his own body in order to call Dylan to keep him from leaving with Meridius. But then also now, because Eddie saw that Dylan bonded with the symbiote, got him locked away in Alchemax, this causes him to tell Dylan not to bond with the Venom symbiote, just like we'd seen in issue 1. But it isn't until Eddie gets off the phone till he remembers Archer Lau. But he figures that he'll tell Dylan everything when he gets there, with him planning to fix all of this before the choppers arrive and more or less undo the past. Which, like we'd seen before, Kang said that's not gonna work. And it's right here where a thought from Eddie's past fills his mind and it pushes him out, back into the time stream. Which from here has Eddie thinking that he's gonna head back to the garden. But when Eddie comes out of the time stream and he lands somewhere very red, he quickly realizes that this isn't the garden. And when Eddie lands here, the first thing he hears is the voice of Meridius, who from here tells Eddie, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. Harder than it seems, isn't it? Escaping your destiny. I know. I found it very difficult." And with the way that Meridius is speaking, it's almost like he's responding to Eddie's thoughts, as if he's having a conversation with what Eddie's thinking. Because with Eddie thinking, "Where am I? Am I in the garden?" And Meridius then responds, "Not the garden, not this time. But you understand now that you cannot escape. If a mind can move in time, it can be moved, captured, and chained. Wherever there's a Clintar, there's a cage waiting for you, a cage to share, if necessary. You've met Bedlam, the big one. He's bigger on the inside, isn't he?" And it's from here where Eddie then sees an opening, and it's showing him the same thing that he saw in his visions of Dylan, with Dylan being in the very moment that Eddie was trying to undo. And it's here where Eddie sees that Bedlam's skin has been peeled back to show him the secrets underneath, allowing Eddie to feel what Bedlam feels. And right away Eddie notices that Bedlam's rage seems so familiar, because Eddie knows this rage, and he knows this rage to be his own, because it's a rage that nobody could just mimic or fake. And as Eddie looks through this opening and he looks into Dylan's eyes, he sees the reflection of the face of Bedlam. And the face that he sees is none other than his own. And it's right here where Eddie realizes that not only is he Bedlam, but he's also killing his son. Which is an even crazier twist, because what we'd seen before with the Venom symbiote telling Dylan that he was trying to be like Spider-Man, to where fast forward to now, it's like Dylan is falling victim to that side of Eddie who has wanted to kill Peter, which again is a side of Eddie that we have not seen in a long time. And this reveal of Bedlam being Eddie, it's made it worse than anything that I could have imagined. Because in the beginning for both Eddie and the symbiote, when they first came together, the symbiote had that breakup hatred for Spider-Man, and Eddie blamed Peter for his life falling apart. And together, their sole motivation and only goal in life was to kill Spider-Man. So it's like now with us getting all these nudges to Dylan being like Spider-Man and wanting to be the hero, and it really just feels like Dylan has just been set up to be a victim to Eddie's rage in the worst way. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who's new here who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below so we can go to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.